Realm presents The Triangle. Episode 3.
Tessa Dumont's first moments of consciousness were of cold, damp rock and the smell of too many people. Her brain took a moment to catch up with her sore body and remind her of the run to the cave after the crash on the beach. She opened her eyes to see the low limestone roof silhouetted by sunlight streaming in from the mouth of the cave. Their hiding place probably seemed big to the child who had brought them here, but with 6 adults, it was cramped. Somehow she'd edged up wedged between St. Clair and Hammond, and she wasn't sure which of them was snoring more loudly. Dumont was happy to cope with all kinds of hardships, including the indignity of trying to pee in a bottle on long-haul ferry flights. But this enforced proximity to so many people was too much. Her head ached, her bones were stiff, and every breath was filled with the scent of mold and sweat and bad breath. She pulled herself to a sitting position, ducking to avoid the low ceiling. "Good morning," McBride called out, leaning against the far wall. The bright blue sky outside told Dumont it had only been a couple hours since they'd discovered the boat stripped and run for cover. The little girl lay near the mouth of the cave, on the far side of Sagara, still clutching her rabbit. Everyone else was still asleep, exhausted. Sagara had mentioned a watch, but the Navy woman, Milton, was in no state to guard anything, and even St. Clair had pooh-poohed the idea, laying her windbreaker on the ground as a sheet and declaring, "I don't believe in goblins," before closing her eyes and feigning sleep. Their first priority had to be to find a way off this island, and the way to do that was, 1, find out where the island was, and 2, restore communications with the rest of the world. To restore communications, she needed the radio working, and the radio couldn't work without an antenna. Well, there must be some way to jury-rig it, but she didn't know how, and without the internet, she'd no way of finding out. If only Hammond hadn't interrupted her. He'd picked up all that irrelevant recording junk. They didn't need to record, they needed to transmit. She made a fist and released it to help herself focus, not liking that she was in the middle of her own incident. But she wouldn't let that muddy her thoughts. 6 adults and 1 child. She looked around the cave, confused. Miller, that was her name. She wasn't there. Where did Miller go? Hammond sat up with a start and knocked his head on the roof, covering both of them in a shower of soft limestone. St. Clair sat up more carefully. Sagara jumped to the mouth of the cave. She was just here. He stared out and then back in, shaking his head in confusion. The little girl scurried away from him but sat down again near the entrance, her arms wrapped around her legs. There was a brief flurry of activity as everyone looked around the cave as if they might have misplaced a 5'7" sailor under the sofa. "She probably just slipped out for a pee," said McBride, his voice as lackadaisical as ever. "I was just thinking about doing the same." "She was unconscious." Hammond's voice was overloud in the small cave. "We need to set up a search party." "We need not to go running around the island like headless chickens." St. Clair pulled out one of the water bottles. "Just a sip," she said, with a glare that dared anyone to take more. She passed the bottle to Dumont, who took a small swallow. It was lukewarm and stale, but she longed for another. She passed the bottle to McBride before she was tempted to down it. He took a sip, swiped his hand across his lips, then took another, handing the bottle to Hammond before St. Clair could say anything. "She got out past Sagara just fine, didn't she?" He grinned when Sagara's cheeks flushed a dusky rose. "She's probably scouting the island right now for us, finding out the lay of the land. They'll get her name in the credits for sure." "Or the moon people got her," piped up the little girl, the first word she'd spoken since they left the beach. They fell silent at her words. McBride sat up straighter. She's got a good point. We need to find these moon people, find out who or what they are. His eyes glittered in excitement. I'll go. St. Clair's voice dripped with sarcasm. Wonderful. So we can lose another person. Or, maybe we can find some supplies and a defensible site so that we might survive more than a week on this island. Don't be such a drama queen. McBride rolled his eyes. We won't be a week on this island. Even if the Admiral's troops weren't already on their way in force, that lovesick deputy of yours is sure to be searching for you, dying to prove himself as your knight in shining armor. I reckon we have a day or two, max 3, to find the aliens. He dusted himself off, smearing something greenish-brown across his pink shirt. Probably bat guano. Hollywood might even buy the rights up front. The Island of the Moon People, starring Nathan Fillion as Alistair McBride. He gave up on his shirt and looked around at the others. We need to get a move on. We need you to shut up, snapped Segara. No, he's right, said Hammond. We need to find Miller. She might be hurt. St. Clair spoke at the same moment. It depends if she left the cave on her own 2 feet. She's armed and the Admiral's armed too, for all that it helps him, said McBride. The cave fell silent again. McBride just smiled. He's got 2 now since he took Johnson's last night. He turned toward Segara. What's a man need with 2 guns? McBride, if you think I'm giving you a weapon. McBride just laughed. Oh, no, not me, but St. Clair here. She's law enforcement. Surely she's been trained to use a handgun. St. Clair was angry, too. Of course I have. You don't need a gun, snapped Segara. I just took it for safekeeping. It would be safe with me, too, and more useful. I disagree. Segara's voice was steel. Dumont had had enough. She understood that there was an important power negotiation happening, but she didn't have time for it. Cockpit resource management dictated that everyone needed to work as a team, but her years of unraveling accidents had also taught her that direct action was important. The pilots who did something were the ones who survived, not the ones who discussed things forever. She stood, ducking carefully as she brushed the sand from her jeans. I'm going back to the boat. She made her way to the entrance, pausing to blink at the daylight. Segara didn't stop her. Good idea. Hammond, you help Dumont recover what you can get from the boat. St. Clair is not going searching for aliens, snapped St. Clair before he could finish his sentence. Fine. I'll go with McBride for a quick recon. See if we can find Miller. You take the girl and set up a campsite near the boat. Me? Do I look like a babysitter? I'm not a civilian admiral. Stop treating me like one. Would you rather go with McBride? Dumont didn't need to turn back to know what the look on St. Clair's face must be. Perfect. McBride clapped Segara on the shoulder in what was presumably some sort of bonding gesture. We'll deal with these moon people together. Segara gave him a flat look. Reconnaissance. We will very quietly scout the island and find out what's here. That's all. He shook his head. This is no time to go playing the hero. Oh, don't you worry. I'll leave you the heroic last stand. Someone has to survive to tell our story. He strutted past Dumont, flashing her a quick smile. Let's go catch us some aliens, Admiral. Dumont heard Segara's long-suffering sigh as she slid down the slope toward the beach. She ignored Hammond coming up behind her. The beach was empty, just like when they'd arrived. Then the girl had appeared. The little girl voice from the Cessna crash. Something bothered her about that, although she couldn't quite put her finger on it. It was possible that the pilot had set the aircraft up for an emergency landing once they'd seen the island, giving the girl enough time to move to the front and make a radio call before the aircraft glided onto the beach. A Cessna Turbo number 46 something. Dumont shook her head. the facts of the case slipping away from her. She needed the report. Something about the details didn't add up. Once they were off the island, she'd look it up. She squinted against the afternoon sun shining through a thin layer of cloud. Her NTSB cap was another thing gone missing. She had a crick in her neck from sleeping on the hard surface of the cave. And now she had sand in her shoe. Dumont did not like this desert island thing, not one bit. The water line at the beach was high, small waves licking around the hull of the boat. There was a gash in the hull where they'd run into the wreck. She stared at that rusting ruin, just visible in the offshore fog, willing it to reveal its secrets. Then she turned back to their boat. The damage was worse than she'd realized. If they hadn't run aground, she was pretty sure they would have sunk. She pulled herself onto the deck and looked at the steering station again. Wrecked. Whoever had removed the electronics had made even more of a mess of the station than she had. A number of mysteries confronted her, and she didn't like any of them. The obvious first question was the one she devoted her life to at the NTSB. Why had they crashed? It was a boat, not an aircraft, but the same principles held. They had a competent crew and a clear route. The storm was a contributing factor, their decision to carry on into it another one. But she didn't feel like Sagara and St. Clair had acted recklessly. They'd raced against the storm, heading for safe waters. The wall of fog was disorienting, but not in itself dangerous in the open sea. Still, the holes in the cheese were lining up. Classic setup for an accident. A minor inciting incident led to more failures until any trivial issue could end in disaster. And then that final event happened. An island appeared out of nowhere. This boat had been stripped carefully and relatively competently, despite the damage. Moon people. This wasn't the work of aliens. The sea foam swirled around the bow. There were two possibilities. No, three. One, the navigational equipment failure caused them to lose their way and they were nowhere near the coordinates they'd been looking for. Two, they were at the correct coordinates and the island was unknown, only documented by drug traffickers and pilots about to crash. Three, the island was some sort of black hole, drawing hapless travelers toward it in the thick of the storms. A large gull swooped low for a better look, and then, clearly deciding Dumont wasn't edible, climbed away again. Dumont had never seen any need to believe in the paranormal, and the idea that no one had ever found this island didn't sit right with her, which meant that they must be at the wrong coordinates. They were on track for the right location. The navigation equipment was state-of-the-art and shouldn't have failed. There was no reason why they should have ended up anywhere other than where they intended to be. So, Hammond's voice came from behind her. He had taken off his shoes, toes digging into the sand. What do you think? They'd made the classic mistake of departing despite the storm, but she didn't feel like that aspect explained how they'd run aground here on this island, this inhabited island. Someone had, after all, stolen their antenna, and Dumont planned to find that someone and take it back. How could an inhabited island not be on our map? She said. St. Clair waved from across the beach and caught up to them. How are you getting on? Did you mark the high tide line? We need to know where to dig a shit pit. Dumont pointed at the water swirling around the bow of the boat. St. Clair drew a line in the sand. Any clues as to who stripped it, or why? All I can tell is that they must have been here after the crash. Well, no shit, Sherlock, said St. Clair, but she softened it with a smile. Sorry. I'm just worried about Miller. There's no sign of her anywhere around the cave. I don't know where she could have gone. Hammond frowned. Where's Olivia? Wasn't she with you? St. Clair looked behind her and then shrugged. God knows. But I'm not worried about her. She knows the island. She took us to shelter. She'll be fine. Fine? Hammond looked aghast. First Miller goes missing and now Olivia. Why am I the only one worried about them? Dumont turned back toward the sea, ignoring him. The fast-moving current had abated. The mist curled around the ship in the distance. How far could we have drifted when you intercepted us? Were we already off course then? St. Clair's voice was testy. We should have been clear until Bermuda. Instead, we're here. And we don't know where here is. We don't know exactly where here is, no. The GPS failed first. Then the compass started spinning. But I kept us on a straight course. We're not lost. It's this island. It shouldn't be here. Oh my God, I can't with this crap, said Hammond. Who cares how we got here? He stood between them, halting all conversation. You guys were disappearing one by one. Who's next? Why aren't we doing something right now? St. Clair put a hand on his arm. Because we got to take care of ourselves first. Listen, Hammond. You ever see those horror movies when someone goes out for some firewood or whatever, and an axe murderer gets them, and then the next person says, "Hey, where's he gone?" And goes outside, and the axe murderer gets him, and then a third person is all, "Where'd my friends go?" And you are screaming at the screen, but no, the dumb shit goes out there, and the axe murderer gets him. Hammond was scowling, but he nodded. Right now, Hammond, you are the dumb shit, and this entire damn island is the axe murderer. So come on, work with me. We need to set up camp. Up there where the vegetation meets the sand. That'll give us some shade and keep us out of the wind. But we'll still be in sight of the boat. She swatted. What we really need is mosquito netting. Dumont felt like a light bulb might have illuminated over her head. Like putting on your own oxygen mask before helping others. That's it, said St. Clair. So let's stay focused on getting ourselves a base that we can defend. She drew a circle just above the high water mark and started digging. Then she shot Dumont a look. I didn't let us drift, she said. I know where we are, and there's no island here. That's worse, said Hammond. So you think this is like McBride says? The island doesn't really exist and we're in some parallel universe with the aliens? He looked worriedly out to sea. You think that's what happened to us? St. Clair snorted. I think McBride's full of shit, and he'll believe anything that'll sell books. And I've only known the man for one afternoon. She flung the sand behind her as she dug with her hands. I also think you should stop wimping out and help me dig. We still need a fire pit and water and a better windblock. Protection for ourselves and our stuff. Then we can scout the island. Hammond got down on his knees and helped her dig. We aren't going to live long enough to die of hunger, he said. We're all going to get picked off one by one until everyone is dead. And then, Dumont interrupted him. Islands can't be in the wrong place. They are where they are. She turned around, looking at the beach leading toward the hills. A slope disappeared into the distance, an unknown mountain. It wasn't even as if it was a small island. So if we are where you thought we were, why isn't this island on any map? I don't know and I don't care, snapped St. Clair. Now come on and help me set up camp. She turned on her heel and walked away. Hammond gaped at her for a moment and then, with only the quickest glance at Dumont, chased after her. Dumont climbed down from the boat. She hadn't meant to upset St. Clair. Her questions had been serious. The gull swooped down again, cawing in complaint. Dumont shook a fist at it. Hey. A soft touch on the back of her leg had Dumont spinning around and stepping backwards so fast she fell into the sand. The little girl stood there, one hand reaching out, the other clutching her stuffed rabbit. Jesus, what are you doing? Don't creep up on me like that. Sorry, said the little girl. I looked for that missing lady. I think the moon people got her. Dumont frowned. What about the stuff missing from our boat? Was that the moon people too? She gave a little girl shrug and then looked at her rabbit. What's missing? The radio antenna, the emergency beacon, the last of our fuel, the GPS, all our electronics pretty much, my cap. The girl looked at the boat too and then shook her head. I don't think so. I think they would have taken the whole boat, not just pieces of it. She smiled at Dumont. Do you want some fruit? I know where to pick the nice ones. I guess so, said Dumont absent-mindedly, trying to make sense of the girl's words. Where are the moon people? They're in the water. I'm going to get you some plums. And with that, she waved and started running a zigzag across the beach, following the lines of the waves cresting on the shore. Dumont watched her disappear into the distance. The truth was, St. Clair was right. It didn't matter what went wrong or how or even where exactly. She didn't care about the moon people, although she hoped that Miller was all right, but she could think about that later. What they needed, right now, was the goddamned antenna. Someone on this island had taken it, and she wanted it back. The two men headed uphill and inland. Segara wanted to get a good look around the island from the high ground, get an idea of its size and the lay of the land, not to mention possible locations for an enemy base. He hoped as well that they would find some trace of Miller. He was convinced that she'd left the cave of her own accord. He may have fallen asleep, but he sure as hell wouldn't have slept through strangers entering that tiny cave to drag her out. But he couldn't imagine that she would intentionally disappear. No. Someone either took her or hurt her after she left. He checked his weapon as he made a mental promise that he would find out who. They hadn't even made it up the side of the ridge before Segara was regretting his decision to take McBride. The man wouldn't shut up. As the mature members of this team and those with the most experience, by which I mean both in terms of academic and life experience, of course, we need to be the ones to take charge. Whatever we find today, whoever these moon people are, the two of us need to agree on a plan and strengthen the bond with the team. Segara clenched his jaw with the effort of not telling McBride to jump off a cliff. I'm not concerned about team building, he finally spat out. McBride, we're stranded here. We have no means of communication, no source of supplies, and an unknown level of potentially hostile activity. This isn't Hollywood. We have a perilous situation here with real risk. He bit off the rest of the sentence. Especially to idiots like you. McBride reached out, patted Segara's arm. Yes, I know. And I understand that even you need a pep talk now and then. I want you to know that I'm happy to be there for you. Segara pulled his arm away, stone-faced, refusing to dignify McBride's offer with a response. Luckily, the slope up the trail got rougher and steeper, which seemed to slow his chatter. Once at the high ground, they could get a better look. Segara sank back into his own thoughts. Someone stripping the boat, that could be dealt with, protected against. But someone who had kidnapped or killed a highly trained sailor, even if she had a bump to the head, that was a force to be reckoned with. He imagined 3 trained fighters would struggle to take Miller if she didn't want to be taken. As they crested the top of the slope, Segara assessed their situation. He could see their boat on the coast on the south side of the island. In the distance, the late afternoon mist was collecting around the battered shipwreck. It was so corroded, it was impossible to tell much about it. It must have been there 40 or 50 years, maybe even more. Not military, he'd have heard of it. Maybe an old freighter. His eyes drawn by movement, he saw Hammond and Dumont pushing through the undergrowth above the beach. Dumont picked some fruit and showed it to Hammond, who only shrugged. He hoped that they found more than that. St. Clair was doing a good job of rationing the water, but they needed to find a fresh supply soon. He'd hoped that the storm and fog might mean rain, but the day had remained regrettably dry. St. Clair was farther down and looked to be setting up camp. Sagara nodded with approval. I'm thinking the two of us could do the book signing circuit together. They'll love us, you know? Especially the women. Below, on the ridge leading to their cave, Sagara could see thick, low-growing plants, hopefully a sign of running water. East of the bay, he could see a large lagoon filling the center of the island, protected from the sea by a series of reefs and sandy inlets. The north and west sides of the island were obscured by the mountain, and the tall tree fern surrounded its rocky base, too steep to climb. I'm thinking The Tonight Show, Ellen DeGeneres, it's the big time. You do the retired badass act. They'll eat it up. The two men continued to follow the ridge, looking down over the other side of the island. The sparkling blue waters of the Caribbean came back into view, shimmering in the low afternoon sun. McBride, shut up. The remains of a rusting old aircraft wallowed in the shallow water, one wing raised high in the air, as if it had been banking in for a landing on the beach when it crashed into the reef. No, I'm serious. They will love you, Admiral. You'll have middle-aged women swooning at your feet and buying my book to find out more about you. Together, we can make a bestseller. The island seemed surrounded by these old wrecks. The collapsed warship, the coral reef littered with rusting parts by the cave, the airplane. It didn't make sense that this little island would have so many rotting wrecks littering its shallow waters. The twin turboprop looked pretty modern, but the muscles clinging to it at the waterline proved that it must have been there for decades too. Shit, said McBride. Sagara turned toward him and then followed his gaze down to the valley below, or, more specifically, the ramshackle hut in the middle of it. That doesn't look like alien technology, muttered McBride. It sure didn't. Nor did he think it was the work of a native islander. Calling it a hut was a kindness. It was more of a lean-to, with a lonely palm tree seemingly holding the structure up. The roof was made of still green palm trees. It must have needed constant replacing. The rest of the shack was made of random pieces of things, the side of a rowboat, pieces of palm bark, the large leaves from the low plants he'd seen near the cave. It doesn't, said Sagara. Anything that shut McBride up had to be a good thing. Let's go find out. He pushed apart the spiky shrubs to hike down the hill. No, wait, not yet. Sagara took a deep breath to steady his impatience before turning back to McBride. Now what? Let me catch my breath. McBride made a flapping motion with his hand. Besides, there's no need to rush. I could get a whole chapter out of spying on the hut, you know? Enough was enough. You do what you want. I'm going to find out who's there. Sagara stormed down the hill, getting as much distance between himself and McBride as he could before he punched the guy. As he reached the tall trees at the start of the valley, he saw something move in the distance and froze. An old man stepped out, all skin and bones and long white hair, leaning on the door, which looked like it might collapse even at his slight weight. Sagara called out and began walking toward him. Hello. The man disappeared and then came into view again, this time carrying a gun. Sagara hadn't exactly expected a warm welcome, but neither had he expected an octogenarian with a short-barreled carbine pointed straight at him. What are you doing? McBride hissed from somewhere behind him. Sagara signaled behind his back for McBride to keep his distance, then held his hands up, taking one careful step toward the man. We come in peace, he shouted. We're shipwrecked. The man wore something tattered and green. It could have been an old uniform. Military? But from where? We mean you no harm, he called, taking another step forward. The response was the ka-chink of a round being chambered. Sagara froze. waving his hands above his head in the universal symbol for surrender. His position was shit, completely exposed here at the foot of the hill. The best he could hope for was to convince the man to let him speak. Clearly, the old man wasn't in on the plan. He lifted the barrel slightly and squeezed off a round. Perfect technique, thought a part of Segarra's mind, even as he threw himself to the ground. He heard the whistle of the bullet passing overhead. Then a deafening silence. Segarra knew there was no way his reactions were fast enough to dodge a bullet. The man had missed, possibly on purpose. Segarra scrabbled on the ground, wishing McBride was clever enough to give him a diversion. He had 15 rounds in his pistol. He could waste one here or maybe wing the man, maybe get shot. This was a stupid way to die, on his belly, knocked out by some grandpa who barely had enough strength to hold the gun. He looked up. The old man stared him down from the doorway and lowered the barrel to point at Segarra's chest. No more warnings. McBride made a loud whimpering sound. Segarra glanced back to see him still standing where Segarra had left him, in full view of the shooter. The man must have noticed him at the same moment. The valley rang with the sound of another gunshot, and Segarra saw the splash of sand at McBride's feet. "Take cover!" he shouted to McBride. He heard the old man fire the gun again as McBride scrambled up and out of sight. Segarra jumped to his feet and ran toward the slope, hoping 2 targets might buy them a moment of confusion. Segarra climbed faster, knowing he was now the easier target. But what choice did he have? He made it to the ridge. The crashing sounds in the trees ahead of him told him that McBride was clear of the line of fire and still running. His heart froze at another sharp crack before his brain registered that it wasn't a gunshot. He looked back to see the man gone. The sound had been the slamming of the door, the shack sturdier than it looked. Segarra didn't pause as he got safely out of the line of sight, running to pass McBride. The old man must have had some sort of survival training to have built the place, which looked almost new, even though he clearly had been there for some time. Segarra was sure he hadn't heard of any missing 80-year-old servicemen. He slowed to a jog, giving McBride a chance to keep up while he mentally processed the scene. If the man had meant to shoot him, he'd be dead. Those were warning shots. Now that he was out of the range of fire, he felt sure of that. He also felt confident that the man didn't have Miller, although it was possible that he might have shot her. Something was off, though. Firing 3 times just to ensure they stayed away didn't seem like judicious use of ammunition. The man either had a very large store of ammo, or there were not many nosy people to shoot at, else he'd have run out years ago. McBride crashed through the bushes behind him, his breath labored. The vegetation here was thick and tore at their clothes as they ran back to the cave. He wanted to make sure that Miller hadn't returned before heading down to the beach to find the others. Jesus, some crazy hillbilly on a desert island. How long do you think he's been stranded here? He must be as old as Methuselah. McBride wheezed heavily, his face red. You okay? Segarra paused, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. McBride waved him away and propped himself on a stunted tree, one hand on his chest. I'm fine. Just give me a minute. Segarra took the time to check out their surroundings. The sun was low on the horizon. Night would fall soon. He looked around, searching for a clear route to the cave. Then he saw a patch of blue on the thorn scrub. He reached for it. A torn bit of blue fabric. Miller. McBride stepped over, his cheek still pink. Did you find something? Looks like a piece of Miller's uniform. Huh. McBride didn't seem the least bit interested as he looked back toward the ridge, as if worried the old man might still be coming after them. But then he surprised Segarra. Look here, the broken branches, and those ferns are dented. He pointed. Here, here, and here. Something has passed through. More than one person. He paused, tilting his head. or entity. McBride was right. There had been several people. Segara was now convinced that Miller had been taken. He wanted to chase them down and make them regret having ever screwed with the United States Navy. He pressed down the white-hot rage and turned away. At first light, he tracked them down. "Come on," he said gruffly. "Let's find the others." The men walked side by side around the outcropping of rock back to the bay. McBride wiped his brow. "I just hope St. Clair's done something clever, like mattresses of seaweed or a campfire with roasted banana." Segara tuned his voice out as they made their way to the camp, still disturbed at who or what might be out there. Marie St. Clair used a palm leaf to sweep the floor of her campsite. She was pleased with it. More comfortable than the cave, but still protected from the winds, with a bit of shade from the palm. She desperately wanted to scout for a source of fresh water and find out who the hell else was on this island. But she'd meant what she'd said. First, they needed to get stable. The sun was low, silhouetting the black-back gulls fishing along the shallow water. It was maybe an hour until sundown. Tomorrow morning, she would do a proper search. She dug a small ditch near the high grass and laid the last 2 bottles of water in the hole, a palm leaf keeping them insulated. Already her throat was parched, and the others were complaining constantly. With the amount of green in the center of the island, she hoped for a spring or stream somewhere, and the constant fog on the horizon promised regular rainfall. They just needed to find a source. "Hey, Marie, look what we found!" Hammond ran up, dropping a stack of driftwood at her feet like a well-trained retriever. Dumont came up behind him, still looking distracted as her brain chewed over their situation. St. Clair had a grudging respect for her persistence. She shook her head at Hammond. "Just about anything burns better than driftwood," she said. "It's the salt. And this is still damp." Hammond's face fell, as if her dismissal were a personal slight. Everyone seemed to be looking at her to validate them. St. Clair never faltered at taking responsibility, but honestly, this was pushing it. Before Segara withholding the gun, Dumont convinced that she'd led them astray, and Hammond worrying about the little girl. Her confidence had taken a serious knock. Still, there they stood, looking at her, waiting to be told what to do. "What we need is some palm bark and twigs from the shrubs. And see over there, on the slope?" She pointed at a line of stunted trees. "Look for fallen branches, and check the trees. See if you can find more fruit." That depended on how many people were trying to survive on the island, of course, and whether they had supplies. "And keep an eye out for flat rocks for the fire pit." They looked relieved at having been given a job and headed inland. She watched them go, making sure they stayed within sight of the camp. A secret island would be a good hideaway for smugglers, or worse. Better to stick to the beach and out of their way, whoever the moon people might be. She picked at a stick, trying to whittle it to a sharp point for a spindle to light the fire with. Her mind kept twisting over the fact that this island wasn't supposed to be here. Dumont clearly thought she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, but St. Clair knew she hadn't. Even the tiniest island showed up on satellite mapping. She stared up at the mountain. But then, that was good, from a survival point of view. St. Clair had lived all her 25 years in the city. Her foraging ability limited to stealing mangoes and breadfruit from old Mr. Wilson's backyard. She didn't know what exactly grew in the wild, other than the coconut palm. But they needed to find fruit, and she needed a good spear. Her youngest brother was a passionate spearfisher. She was good enough to nail the big, slow-moving fish around Green Island, but she'd be hard-pressed to feed all of them. She'd have given anything to have her brother there. Segara's voice echoed down from somewhere over the hill. "McBride, shut up!" St. Clair laughed. No, she didn't know much about surviving in the wild, but she knew more than anyone else around here. She turned back to the shore, still thinking about fish, when something glinted in the sand in front of her. The sun reflected off shiny metal so bright it hurt her eyes. That was not there before. She scanned the beach. There was no one in sight. She stepped closer. A small rectangular metal can with a faded blue label. Something rustled behind her. She spun around, her weight on her back foot, crouched with her fists clenched, ready to attack. Nothing. A breath of wind whispering through the high grass, the caw of a hungry gull. She waited silently for something to move. Nothing. It could have just been a rat or some other small wild animal, except that wild animals didn't usually leave cans lying around. She glanced behind her toward the shore and then up the ridge, where she could see Hammond and Dumont among the trees. There really wasn't anywhere else where the gift giver could hide, unless it really was aliens. She stepped back, keeping her eyes on the long grass where she'd heard the rustle, until the small metal can was at her feet. Now she could see the faded pink meat on the label below the yellow letters proclaiming spam. She glanced in all different directions and then picked it up. The metal was cool to the touch, despite sitting in the warm sand. It had definitely just been placed there. Maybe Miller? She'd been wondering if the woman had done a runner, thinking it easier to take care of herself than to stay with a pack of incompetent civilians. But why would she ditch the group and then leave food parcels? Turning the can in her hands, she saw a black stamp on the base. Best used before 1989. She tossed the can up in the air and then caught it again. Processed meat older than she was. It certainly didn't look it. The label was faded but still legible. But then, spam never went bad. After only a moment's thought, she dug a second narrow hole behind her water cache, just big enough to hide the can. Whoever had left it there had left it specifically for her. If she had a friend on this island, she damn well wasn't going to tell the others about it until she knew where they stood. Of course she would share if it came to that, but they weren't starving yet. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp snap of a gunshot, followed by two more. She stood quickly, searching the area for any movement, legs tense to start running, but whether away or toward, she wasn't sure yet. Dumont and Hammond came sliding down the slope from the ridge above, tumbling over each other in their rush to the beach. Hammond dropped the branches he'd managed to keep hold of in the fall. What if that was Olivia? Dumont looked at him aghast. You think she's got a gun? No, but the Admiral has one. What if she was hiding and the Admiral didn't realize it was her and just shot... St. Clair cut him off. Segura's not the type to panic. No, if he shot anyone, it'll be McBride. The sound of the fighting gulls filled the air once again. The shots had come from some distance away, probably the other side of the island. Hammond paced, kicking up the sand all over the campsite. Dumont stared up at the ridge above them. There's someone over there, she said after a minute, pointing. St. Clair turned as Segura and McBride came scrambling down past the cave entrance. What the hell have you been doing? She shouted as they drew near. McBride grinned. Did you hear that, Admiral? She missed us. Segura just grunted. There was no sign of injury on either, although Segura's once pristine uniform was filthy with mud and grass. Everyone started talking at once. What happened? Who fired those shots? Did you find the Moon People? Did you find Olivia? What we found was an old coot with a gun, said McBride. He shot straight at us, missed me by a hair. I'm lucky to be alive. He glared at Segura. Don't know why he didn't shoot him back, especially with you having two guns and all. I'm not in the habit of shooting civilians. He looked at St. Clair. They were just warning shots. Once we backed off, so did he. He's living in an old makeshift shack on the other side of the island. Shipwrecked, I'd say, but a long time ago. Hair halfway down his ass and his clothes in shreds. Green. He looked thoughtful. St. Clair piled the twigs from Hammond with dry grass and a bit of old moss she'd found by the cave. That plus the bark from the palm would make a decent tinder nest. Hopefully. White? More like red, said McBride. Guy was pretty sunburned. I bet he's got some stories to tell. More important, I found this. Sagara held out a piece of blue fabric. It's camo, from Miller's uniform, up in the brush above the cave. The plants are trampled and we found footprints. There was a crowd there, not just Miller. Well, I think footprints is overstating it, interrupted McBride. A few bent branches, a piece of fabric. He snorted. We can rule out elephants, but there's no actual evidence that they were people. Now that the evening sun was low in the sky, the breeze chilled their skin. St. Clair spun the sharpened stick in a notch in the bark, which she hoped would spark an ember into the dried grass and moss. The others collected around her. She didn't want to tell them that she'd never done this before. I thought Olivia might come back, said Hammond. I'm worried about her. She's fine, said Dumont. St. Clair was almost glad for their squabbling, if it distracted them from watching her attempts at a fire. How can you say that? Something akin to betrayal flashed across Hammond's face. She's alone in the dark on an island with unknown people or alien things. He knelt next to St. Clair. Here, let me help. Hammond rummaged through his pockets, pulling out some pills, a Band-Aid, a piece of duct tape, a ballpoint pen, and, with a bit of a flourish, a lighter. St. Clair blinked. I don't know if I'm impressed or pissed off that you didn't mention this earlier. Hammond shot her a look and then flicked the lighter. Nothing happened. He flicked it twice more, and then, finally, a flame appeared. St. Clair backed up, allowing him to light the tinder. Then she started building the small flame up with the twigs and branches. There are no alien things, said Dumont. Anyway, Olivia is fine. She said she would get us some fruit. You saw her? And you didn't keep her? Dumont stared at him. What did you expect me to do? Tie her up? I don't know, stuttered Hammond. I just thought you might take care of her. She didn't need taken care of. And with that, Dumont turned toward Sagara. Which way do you think they took Miller? The tracks went north and then east, he said. St. Clair strolled down to the water's edge in hopes of finding them some food in the evening light. She scanned the sand for the high water line and searched for holes before she reached into the soft, wet water to dig a trench. The tide had definitely turned now, the waves barely reaching the bow of the boat. As if she had heard them talking about her, Olivia walked up, clutching her rabbit as always. She didn't bother with hellos or how are yous. What are you doing? St. Clair smiled despite herself. I am hunting for crabs. They dig burrows in the sand, like this one, but they like to come out at night. So if you keep digging... She scooped another big handful of sand out, and something twitched at the bottom. There, do you see it? She dug it then and then grabbed it from the back of the shell, out of reach of its claws. But this one is too small. She put it down and it scuttled away, disappearing into the wet sand. What do you do if you catch a big one? Grill it. We've got a fire over there. You should come join us. Olivia looked at the water, her brow furrowed. No, I have to go. She started to run and then paused. I brought you fruit. She handed St. Clair 2 small round pieces of fruit from her pockets and then ran, disappearing around the bend. Jogolt, said St. Clair to herself. They grew all over the islands. She gave up on the crabs and hiked back to the fire to tell the others. McBride's voice drifted across the beach. 5 bombers and 3 rescue planes disappear with zero explanation, and you're telling me there's no cover-up. That's the standard comeback if someone doesn't like the results of an investigation. Cover-up. Why would they want to hide the truth? St. Clair interrupted. No crabs. I need a net, really. But I saw Olivia down there. Never been a fan of seafood, said McBride. St. Clair rolled her eyes, as if anyone cared about his dietary requirements. He didn't notice. Too slimy. Give me a thick steak any day. Hammond was already down the beach, calling after Olivia. St. Clair could just make out the little wraith in the distance, her sundress fluttering behind her. Leave her, Hammond! She placed the Joe-Coat plums near the water cache. She brought us food, which meant that it wasn't her who'd brought the canned meat. Why be secretive about one and not the other? But then, who did bring it? It's getting dark, Hammond shouted back. We can't just leave her out there. He returned to the fire with an unhappy look. Why didn't you tell her to join us? I did. She wasn't interested. St. Clair looked out at the water. She saw something. The moon people? McBride looked hopeful. No, she looked out, not inland. She looked at the water before deciding. Dumont nodded. She did that last night, too. There's something she's seeing. They both stared at the soft waves lapping at the shore. But whatever it was that the little girl was looking for, it eluded them. Dumont pointed out into the distance, where a pod of dolphins breached the surface. They were swimming away from the island. McBride broke the silence, as usual. Christ, I'm dying here. Where's the water? St. Clair watched the dolphins disappear into the fog, and then went to the water cache. It was empty. She shook the palm leaf. Where the hell is the water? No one responded. Someone took the last of our damn water. She wheeled on McBride. If you drank it, I swear to God. He held up his hands in surrender. I might have if I knew where you put it, but I didn't. I was the one asking where it was. She searched his eyes, looking for the signs of a liar. But he was probably telling the truth. He was too spoiled and entitled to realize it was worth lying over. She stared at each of the others in turn. Cigar looked as angry as she did. Dumont just looked bewildered. Hammond? Did you take it? For the little girl? But he shook his head. Maybe she's the one who took it. Maybe. St. Clair thought about the can of Spam, the rustle in the high grass, someone watching her bury the last 2 bottles of water. And now it was gone. She turned her frustration elsewhere. Didn't any of you see any fresh water out there? There was a lake, said Hammond. A lake? What? Yeah, it looked pretty big, actually. St. Clair rolled her eyes. And you didn't get some water? Give me a break, St. Clair. We saw it in the distance. Well, I did from up top on the cliff. I was just pointing out to Tessa when we heard the shot and ran back here. How far? He pointed vaguely inland and east. Not too far. I'm dying of thirst, said McBride. Me too, admitted Hammond. St. Clair sighed. They'd hardly die of thirst before sunrise, but she didn't think she could stand hearing them complain all night long. If McBride kept it up, she'd take one of Cigarra's guns and shoot him herself. She glanced at the setting sun. We've got maybe an hour of light. Let's see if we can find this lake quickly. Come on. The others scrambled to their feet, all except Cigarra. I don't know that this is wise, he said. We need water. St. Clair started to argue, and then realized that he probably just didn't like being told what to do. She had some sympathy for that. She took a deep breath. Sir, she said, trying to show him that she wasn't doubting his authority. We don't know who is on this island with us or what they want. We shouldn't make ourselves any more vulnerable than we already are. I believe making sure we have food and drink is the #1 priority at this stage. Going to the lake now is the safest decision for us." They locked eyes. Frustration flashed across his face, followed by something that she hoped might be a grudging respect. "Let's do that then. Here." He handed her Johnson's M9. "You're right. It's better for you to have it." She took the gun, not sure what to say. He turned away before she had the chance and started walking in the direction that Hammond had pointed, taking the lead. McBride looked from one to the other, an eyebrow raised. "Not bad for a whippersnapper," he said to her, and then followed Sagara. "Hey, if we see the aliens, I'll do the talking." Dumont followed them. Hammond scanned the beach again, probably still hoping Olivia might appear. "Come on," said St. Clair. "She'll turn up when she's ready to turn up. She's taken care of herself this long." Dumont glanced back, her face questioning. Hammond broke into a run to catch up with her. St. Clair tucked the gun into her waistband and, with one more questioning glance at the long grass, followed. Michael Hammond, shipwreck survivor, inhabitant of a desert island. Even to him, the idea seemed ridiculous. But here he was, scouting for danger, leading the team toward water, ready to defend the others even if it risked his life. Well, he wasn't ready to actually risk his life. He wasn't stupid. More than anything, he wished for someone to appear and rescue them. But at the same time, somewhere deep in his gut, it felt good. Right. Like he'd found something worth fighting for. Something to make up for losing Amanda, letting her go without him. But no, he wouldn't think about that. He was a survivor. He kept pace with Dumont, letting Cigar and McBride take the lead. Just like them, the storm ahead, of course. That was fine. He would be there if needed. "Hey, Tessa, I just wanted to say..." He reached out and squeezed her hand. To his surprise, she didn't immediately pull away. He let go before she could change her mind. "We're going to be okay. We'll find Miller and Olivia, and all of us will make it through. It'll be tough, but we'll make it through. I may not look it, but I can be a fighter if that's what we need. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to protect us." She gave him an odd look. He heard a snicker and looked back to see St. Clair coming up behind them. He glared at her and spit up a bit, annoyed. "She's always putting me down," he said to Dumont. "Who?" "Look, I'm sorry," said St. Clair, who'd come up behind them again. You're right. I shouldn't... I know you're trying. It's just frustrating. Easy for me to lose my cool. I'll work on being more patient." She held out a hand to shake. "Friends?" "Friends." He shook, his annoyance forgotten. The three of them walked in silence, the only sound the waves crashing on the shore. "What about you, Tessa?" "Huh?" "I'm going to be more of a fighter. Marie's going to work on being patient. What about you? What do you wish you could change?" She looked at him as if she couldn't even understand the question. What would I change? The location of the goddamned antenna. This time St. Clair laughed out loud, and after a moment, so did Hammond. As the sun set behind them, their shadows grew long, rippling over the glittering sand. The full moon rose over ridges by the mountain, glowing faintly in the still pale sky. Hammond thought about the moon people. Is that why Olivia wasn't with them? Was it a full moon last night, on Water Island? "It was overcast," said St. Clair. "No idea." I don't think it was a full moon, said Hammond. I feel like I would have noticed. When no one said anything, he asked the question that was bothering him. Do you think they might be aliens? The moon people? Dumont made a face. No, she said. The silence fell again. That, apparently, was that. Hammond thought they should keep an open mind about such things, but, well, Dumont was practical. That was a good thing to be. She probably never got depressed, never wondered what the point of being on this planet was, never wondered if the world would be better off without you. The sun dropped below the horizon. Sagara called back. This way? Hammond hurried to Sagara and McBride at the front. Yeah. He pointed to the ridge above them. That's where we were, and I was looking down when I saw it. Just past those palm trees, I think. Sagara gave him an odd look, but carried on. Sure enough, as they broke through the trees, the water came into view, sparkling with the reflection of the full moon in the darkening sky. St. Clair caught up and stared. Her mouth dropped open. That's your lake. Sagara's face was equally mystified as he pointed at the curve of the beach leading to the water. That's a coral reef out there. It's a lagoon. I couldn't see that from up there, said Hammond, feeling silly. Then his confidence returned. But look, the water is flowing out. I think it's fresh water coming down. Maybe not a lake, but an estuary or something. It's fresh water, look. Hammond knelt down and scooped a big handful into his mouth. He spluttered. Definitely salt water. St. Clair rolled her eyes. The tide's going out. She exchanged a look with Sagara. Hammond looked away. She hadn't lasted even 5 minutes before making him feel stupid again. He considered swallowing the water for a moment, just to save his pride, but couldn't bring himself to do it. He spat it out and stood. Well, I couldn't tell that from up there, he snapped, annoyed that everyone was staring at him. Everyone but Dumont. She pointed to the far shore of the lagoon. Look, there's something over there. She jogged past him, her ponytail swinging as she followed the coastline toward the lagoon. The rest followed until they had a clear view of the far shore. As they got closer, he saw the moonlight glinting on glass. On the beach was a small mountain of bottles, metal plates, and melted plastics. It looked like someone was using the beach as a trash dump. McBride touched his shoulder. Shit, Hammond, look at your hands. Hammond held out his hands. They were glowing with a gentle golden sparkle. What the hell? The others crowded around for a better look. You are bioluminescent, said McBride. That's fantastic. He picked up a dried palm leaf and dragged it through the water. In a moment, it also shimmered golden, getting brighter as the last of the sunlight disappeared. St. Clair trailed a finger through the water and held it up, twisting to see the shimmer. Plankton, said St. Clair. It happens sometimes on the beaches of Antigua. Everything begins to glow. Although, I've never seen it gold like that. As the water retreated from the lagoon, the sparkling glow grew brighter. For a rare moment, everyone was quiet as the silver moon rose over the golden lagoon. The waves crashed softly from behind them, and birds chattered in the thick growth near the mountain. Hammond's anxiety lessened for the first time since Sagara had shown up at his door. He'd never seen anything so beautiful. Holy shit, said McBride. Will you look at that? At the far end of the lagoon, sharp right angles could be seen submerged in the water, shimmering in the golden bioluminescence. Buildings. It's Atlantis! McBride started to run, but Sagara grabbed him by his shirt. Dumont's voice was shaky. He's right. Not Atlantis, but it is the Golden City." She rubbed her arms. "It kept coming up in the accident reports. I thought maybe it was the sun glinting off something, or maybe a fire, but..." Hammond nodded. "But this is it." Water dripped from the flat roofs of the squat structures. "This is man-made," said Dumont. "Some sort of facility." "You don't know that. It could be alien-made." McBride's voice cracked with excitement. Segara didn't let go of his shirt, just kept staring. "It's concrete, McBride, not alien tech. Some sort of bunkers, maybe. What the hell is this place? And why isn't it on any map?" Sinclair sounded more angry than awed. The water began rushing out even faster, water running down the sides of the buildings and flowing through canals between them. In the center of the lagoon, something poked through the surface. Hammond couldn't quite make it out, an indistinct shape extending dark and ominous from the water. Then the water broke to reveal a large metal tower, impossibly smooth and blacker than black. "That's not concrete," said McBride. As the waves churned, the base of the sunken platform came into view. A huge metal structure, about the length of a football field, with gently curving sides. "That's genuine alien technology." His voice had dropped to a whisper. "The hell it is," said Segara. Hammond's mouth fell open. The foam of the seawater swirled around the sinister tower and curved roof. It was blacker than anything man-made had any right to be, swallowing the moonlight, not a trace of the golden plankton clinging to it. Hammond had never seen anything like it. It radiated evil. The moonlight picked out the only color: a red star painted on the smooth curve at the front. "Star and moon!" shouted Hammond, as a red crescent came into view. "This is what Olivia was talking about. The moon people."
You're listening to The Triangle, narrated by Neil Helligers. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm. Listen away. The Triangle is written by Dan Kobolt, Mary McGinnis, and Sylvia Spruck Wrigley. Executive produced by Molly Barton and Julian Yap. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.